We are in the book of 2 John. You thought we finished it last week because we read it all. But we didn't. And there's something we need to talk about, and it's something that's not very pleasant to talk about. And you're going, oh great, of all the times I came, I'm going to hear one that's not very pleasant. Not very pleasant, but very important. Let's turn to 2 John. There's only one chapter here. We're going to start in verse 7 again. He said, many deceivers who do not acknowledge that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh have gone out into the world. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch out that you do not lose what you worked for, but that you may be fully rewarded, or rewarded fully. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever continues in the teachings has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take him into your house or welcome him. Anyone who welcomes him shares in his wicked ways. I have much to write to you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face so that our joy may be complete. The children of your chosen sister send their greetings. John writes to this church, and the children, some of whom are following the truth, some of whom are not following the truth anymore. And it comes down to that one verse, verse 7, that says, there are people who don't acknowledge that Jesus came in the flesh. And we've talked about that, goodness, for how many months now as we've read 1 John. We've talked about how important that is. But the text today shows us something about how that heresy spread. I was looking for some kind of shock factor, and I had Lynn put heretic on the front of your order of worship. That's something nobody wants to be called, is a heretic. Right? A heretic, somebody who carries on heresy, somebody who does not stay with the teachings about Jesus. Now, there are people in Asia Minor who are teaching that Jesus did not really come in the flesh. That he looked like he had flesh. Or sometimes he inhabited a fleshly body, and sometimes he left that fleshly body. And we've talked about the ramifications of that. How, if that's true, then what we do on Sunday mornings is worthless. And that if that's true, then your guess is as good as mine as far as what the Creator is actually like. If the Creator didn't come and live for a while among us. Very important. But how did that stuff spread? Well, hospitality. And this is a good introduction to the book we call 3 John. He said, if somebody has this teaching, he said, do not welcome them in your house. Don't even greet them in the street. Now, that sounds unchristian, doesn't it? That has that, wow, that sounds judgmental. And it feels that way too, isn't it? But let me remind you some things about what's going on in Asia Minor at the time. Alright? In Asia Minor, they did not have Motel 6 yet. So nobody was leaving a light on for them. Okay? You came into town, and it probably wasn't far from where you started, because how were you getting there? Yeah, by foot. Right? So maybe you could do 20 miles, 25 miles a day. And you find some village, some town. Where are you going to sleep? Well, you get out the Yellow Pages. And you look up the hotels and you call and see who has a vacancy. Didn't do that. There were inns. There were places you could go to rent a room. They were dangerous. Very dangerous. Because if you were staying there, people knew that you were a traveler. And if you were a traveler, you were probably carrying something with you. Right? Your credit card. So wait a minute, Gary, this is before credit cards. Oh yeah, you're right. So what were you carrying? Cash. You were carrying whatever you had to take in order to make this trip. To buy food and gas. And big goals. Alright. No gas, no pickles. Okay. Food. It's hard for us to step back into this kind of world. They were not only dangerous, they were usually nasty and dirty. The Jewish population would not stay in a Gentile inn, because doing so would make them unclean, right? So if you were a Jewish person, you traveled from town to town, you went and looked for another Jewish believer who would offer you the almost sacred task of hospitality. Taking in a stranger, a traveler. Now, on that side, if you were offering somebody a room, entrance into your home, that was scary. Because you never know who that person is. Right? And it was dangerous. It was a whole different world back there. And so when Christians traveled from town to town, you know who they looked to stay with? Other believers. And other believers would open up their homes and be hospitable. And they would give them a meal, and they would give them a safe place to sleep, and they would give them their protection. Now, that is the way things went. When Paul did his missionary journeys there in Asia Minor, you know where he went first? To the synagogues, to the Jewish people. He stayed with them and he taught in the synagogues until he was kicked out. Almost always in fact. Paul was a missionary. Now, as you had prophets and teachers and apostles traveling about this world, encouraging and strengthening the church, or starting churches, guess where they stayed? With other believers. Now, this is really difficult for us, and I'll talk more about this next week, because the next John, the third letter of John, is really about hospitality in church leadership. Okay? But John, when he traveled about, he would stay with believers. And he ends 2 John and 3 John with the same note. I've got a lot to talk to you about. I've got a lot to write. I don't want to do it with pen and ink. It's expensive. I'm looking forward to seeing you face to face. Which meant that John, in his old age, was going to travel from town to town. Guess who he would stay with? Believers. So, somebody comes from some church somewhere, and they said, I'm a prophet, and I'm on my way teaching about Jesus. Guess where they would stay? With the believers. That is where they taught some things that they should not be teaching. That is where they converted some of the converts to Christianity. That is how they spread this teaching that we call Gnosticism. Okay? That's how it spread. And you know what? It worked. It was very effective. You appealed to somebody based on their reason, their philosophy, their logic, and pretty soon it sounded like it made sense, and so why not just kind of incorporate it and say, yeah, okay, I can see that. And they steered a lot of people astray. So how does John stop that? I mean, we've got this fledgling church. You've got this movement that's now in the second generation. You have believers that are going to face incredible persecutions. But right now it's growing and spreading. How do you stop that? We have a letter we call 1 John. We have a letter we call 2 John. And a letter we call 3 John. And in 2 John he hits on just one thing. He says, if somebody doesn't teach that Jesus came in the flesh, don't open up your home to them. And he goes beyond that and says, don't even greet him in the street. It's important. Somebody's teaching something that takes away from your understanding of Jesus being God. Even though it makes sense to you, even though it may appeal to you, maybe because it appeals to our sinful nature and our pride, saying, yeah, I can figure out God. Yeah, we can figure this out. We can kind of all fit it together, and then everybody's really okay. And, we can just kind of incorporate this and that. And somehow it comes out where Jesus didn't come and become flesh and make that sacrifice on the cross and be buried and raised in that physical body on the third day. If it doesn't come out there, John said, don't play with it at all. And the people spreading that, don't mess with them. Don't fellowship with them. Don't welcome them in your home. Don't let them spread that kind of influence with your family, your friends, your church. Just don't do it. Now, what you've got here is a teaching in an emergency situation, isn't it? And it is an extreme teaching, isn't it? What we're in danger in our sinful nature, is majoring in that. And saying, oh, good, I can decide who I'm going to be hospitable to, who I'm going to greet. I can decide who is a heretic. I can decide who is dangerous and who's not. The whole book of 1 John is about loving one another. Right? Here's the litmus test, John says. It's not about whether you sing from a screen, or you sing from a hymnal, or the hymnal's red, or the hymnal is, what's that other color? Purple? Okay? It's not about whether you sing old songs or new songs. It's not about whether you sit in chairs or pews. It's not about whether you meet on Saturday night or Sunday morning. It's not about that stuff. It's about, do you believe that Jesus came in the flesh? That's what it's about. But I've seen groups, I've seen churches split over some seriously strange things. A lot of it has to do with music, in my background. I've seen churches split about whether you can use, remember the pitch pipes? Right? You get that pitch to get started? And then people who didn't believe in instruments wouldn't use a pitch pipe. Because that was an instrument. I said, well, it's not really an instrument. You can't play a whole song on it. I knew a guy that learned a whole song on a pitch pipe. That took a lot of work. What a silly thing to argue about. What a silly thing to draw a line of fellowship about. What a complete mistake of knowing what it means to love. Here is the test. Do you believe Jesus came in the flesh? Do you believe God became flesh because He loved us so much? He lived for a while among us, and He sacrificed. He laid down His life for us, and that He was raised from the dead. That's it. The rest of it, we don't have to agree on it. We can have opinions on it. But here is what the foundation is. So you know what that means? That means we need to read the book of 3 John and find out what it means to be hospitable. Okay? We're going to talk about that next week. We can't get into this week. Heresy. Heretic. There's some early Christian stories where John the Apostle was going into, and this is wild, okay, a bathhouse. Talk about a cultural thing. You know where you went for the bath, for your bath? Well, you went down to the public bathhouse. And one of these Gnostics came in the door. And John popped up out of the water, and grabbed his robe, and took off and said, let's get out of here before the roof falls down. Didn't want to be in the same room with a person. There's another story about Polycarp, Where one of the Gnostics said, caught him on the street, said, "Don't you recognize me?" He says, "Yes, I recognize the firstborn of Satan." They were not going to put up with this teaching that destroys everything that Jesus did. This is the important thing. And if you haven't got it now, read 1 John again. Read 2 John again. Doesn't take very long. If anyone comes and does not acknowledge that Jesus come in the flesh, don't have him in your house. Don't greet him on the street. Don't allow them to spread that and take away all he said that God has worked for in Jesus. All that the apostles went through, all the church has gone through, all the work that's gone on. Don't let them destroy that by planning something else in your head. And extreme. Very important. Very important. We are a hospitable group. I don't think that we will go to extremes and not fellowship with people. I mean, you guys are disciples for a reason. You're here because you decided that I'm not going to have to agree with everybody's opinion on everything or a creed. I'm just going to fellowship with you because you believe Jesus is Lord. And that's why we celebrate the Lord's Supper every Sunday. And that's why we invite anybody who's here, who believes Jesus is Lord, to take that with us without knowing what all they believe, without agreeing with all they believe, just because that's what we have in common. That's the communion. That is the commonness we